Satire. The use of satire in Nikolai Gogol's famous short story, The Nose, is a perfect example of the varying types of humour in literature, as well as its importance. The satirical nature of The Nose is not an uncommon technique to be featured and explored through writing. As writers, we engage with our reader in a myriad of ways, forming a connection through a variety of mediums. Famous authors such as Charles Dickens, Joseph Teller, and more recently, comedian Frankie Boyle, showcase this almost effortlessly. In text, satire is commonly used to highlight the reality of the human condition. This can range from personal concepts to large social topics and problems. The use of this technique can also evoke surprise with the reader, which we'll explore later. Creating surprise for the reader is one of the most effective ways of creating an interest that keeps the audience engaged and overall pleased. At the base level, this is what we aim to achieve as writers. More specifically, The Nose introduces several ideas that are explored and explained through satire, which in turn highlight the social and political environment at the time of the book's publication. Again, we will dive into this further later in the presentation. Nikolai Gogol was widely renowned as a Russian novelist, specializing in short stories and playwrights. One of his most famous texts, The Nose, was published in 1863. The Nose is a short story that focuses on the individuals of varying social class and status and the events relating to a nose. That's right, a literal human nose. Gogol was famous for exploring grotesque and almost fanatical themes which absolutely tie in with this particular text. The Nose also features multi-perspectivity, the exploration of the story through multiple perspectives, giving the reader a glimpse to the importance of the nose to each respective party. Gogol was famous for incorporating satire in his stories, including The Nose and the tale of how Ivan Ivanovich quarrelled with Ivan Nikiforovich. The absurdity of the plot featured in The Nose is cemented in satire and therefore essential to understanding. The satirical nature of The Nose is enhanced by Gogol's use of absurdity, but he's not the only author to do so. Authors including Lewis Carroll and Albert Camus are known to employ this technique. At its base level, absurdity refers to the fantastic and at times almost magical circumstances of the novel. Naturally, as creative fiction writers, we strive for an element of the absurdity. However, Gogol mixes real-world presentation of 1863 St. Petersburg with an absurd plot device, which inflames the absurdity to new levels. Specifically, the novel is almost dissociative in nature due to how outlandish the use of the nose as satirical material is. Gogol also uses this to emphasize the randomness of life and the unpredictability which it entails. This also contrasts very effectively with the dissociative lifestyle of late 1800s Russia, where class segregation was large and everyone's lives were, in essence, planned for them based on their status. This also ties in with Gogol's expression of political and social realities at the time of the publication as well. Having cut the loaf into two halves, looked inside, and to his astonishment, saw something white. He stuck his finger inside and extracted a nose. The effect this has is making a statement that real life is long and full of the absurd and unexpected. The reality of finding a nose in a fresh loaf of bread without any reasoning of justification is absurd. This feeds into the satirical nature of the piece. Moreover, it also feeds into the belief that not everything in life needs or even has an explanation, establishing a varying level of unpredictability in the story. Multi-perspectivity. Multi-perspectivity is a unique technique, particularly in short stories, where only so much of a story and information can be presented. The use of this establishes a sense of dissociation in the text. While the characters experiencing emotion that relate to the nose, their days and stories are vastly different, which again feeds into the commentary of the then social climate. Additionally, exploring multiple perspectives allows the reader to become invested in the characters. The more we understand them, the more they grow on us and become something more than simple words on a page. Ironically, the method of attracting the reader in this text is using unattractive concepts. A severed nose, socioeconomic issues, etc., This brings a level of estrangement to the story, another branch of the overarching satirical techniques used by Gogol in The Nose. Here, we look at aspects of life from a strange POV, or point of view. Doing so can reveal a fresh and previously unseen perspective. As stated, this is also applicable to the then socio-political climate, specifically the relationship between Ivan and Potocina, though explored very briefly, is actually quite toxic. You beast, where did you cut off the nose? I won't even hear of it, that I should allow a cut-off nose to lie about my room, you dry stick. Though humorous, the interaction is quite hostile, with Potocina almost seemingly attempting to incriminate Ivan without giving him the chance to tell his side. Again, like many of Gogol's use of satire in this text, this interaction is very symbolic of the socio-political climate in 1863 Russia, conveying the estrangement of society and the distance of warmth and caring in what should be a relatively safe environment. Speaking of symbolism, satire is also heavily dependent on this. Moreover, the use of absurdity allows us as readers to delve deeper into the meaning of various areas of the text. In particular, the indication that the nose itself represents a primary form of masculinity is heavily referred to. From colleague assessor Kovalev's perspective, he has lost everything upon awakening and discovering the absence of his nose, to the extent that he publicly shames himself. This ties in heavily with the theme of identity and status featured in the piece, also reinforced by the use of uniform in the nose, particularly the uniforms being worn by police officers and state officials, and their heavy description in the book symbolise rank in society. Ordinary clothes, such as worn by Ivan the barber, represent the lower status of the wearer. A barber, wearing undistinguished clothes that identify him almost as a non-person or someone of no value, is a fantastic contrast when we begin to describe different types of outfits in the text. He was forced to walk, wrapped up in his cloak, his face covered with a handkerchief, pretending that his nose was bleeding. He was wearing a gold-embroidered uniform with a big stand-up collar and doeskin breeches. There was a sword at his side. From his plumed hat, one could infer that he held the rank of state councillor. At last, he got out of his underwear and boots and pulled on these tatters. The effect that this has of using masculinity as a key theme is exacerbated by symbolism and enforces the importance and relevance of social hierarchy in this story. This is enforced by the extensive description and contrast of uniform between the two characters. Stripped of his nose and masculinity, Kovalev becomes a completely different person. No longer puffed up and domineering, the noseless Kovalev is timid and submissive. This, in turn, is symbolic of the satire that Gogol successfully conveys through the plot of the story to, again, drive home the instability in his time period. Why use satire and these sub-techniques? The importance of satire boils down to its wide range of applicability. Firstly, its real-world application to actually provoke critical thinking about relevant topics is unparalleled. The ease of reading that satire also encourages through humour and related techniques makes the issues explored seem very approachable, which in turn encourages people to talk about and engage with them. Additionally, it allows the reader to gain an understanding of real-world issues through a positive and engaging medium. In my piece of text, I've attempted to incorporate all characteristics we've explored today. Some prove more difficult than others, such as estrangement, which I believe requires a relatively larger amount of text. First, I attempted to establish a level of satire by defining the story as political, setting the scene in that of an interview between a politician, Mark, and the interviewer, Mia. I also wanted to introduce a level of absurdity early on in the plot and attempt to maintain this. Mark's public use of an illicit substance, combined with him being hilariously dragged away with the police without any form of change in scene in regards to the interview. I believe this to reality to be so outlandish and unrealistic that it fits perfectly into absurdity. The multi-perspectivity was also hard for me to implement. I wanted to allow the audience into the two minds of the characters and understand their arguments. My attempt at doing so brings the audience closer to the story, and we begin to immerse them into this absurd, satirical world. Finally, the symbolism within this story, perhaps the most key part to understanding why satire is so important. A description of Mark's clothes conveys status of a prominent figure, while the description of his shoes also conveys that he is not completely clean. If we compare this to Gogol's The Nose, we see that the description of uniform is present in both these texts, and therefore very symbolic of the way that we perceive people in power, and how this hasn't changed as the years have gone on. Combining these techniques has allowed for a satirical piece of text to be created, which, again, alludes to the social and political issues by addressing the reality of our world through the characters' actions and interactions. This, in turn, is reinforced by that overarching medium technique of satire, where we again begin to look at our society through using techniques such as humour, symbolism, to an attempt to understand why we do the things what we do. Thank you very much for listening. I do hope you have enjoyed and have learnt something about not only satire, but its use in writing. Thanks again.